All right, I think we're ready to go. So welcome back for the final plenary session of the day. And I know it's getting late in the day, but don't worry. This is the last presentation we're going to show you, but please do stick around afterwards to engage in the award ceremony. I think that's going to be worthwhile to want to see and be part of the inaugural AWP Awards. Our final session today is a case study. Involving my organization as well as a couple other organizations, and we'll introduce the group here shortly. But really, it's an opportunity to have both an owner and a contractor really talk about how AWP implementation is going on a real-life project that is underway. So to reintroduce, I'm Alexis Thorne. I am the head of engineering for global capital projects inside LyondellBasell's, which means I'm accountable for helping getting our large capital expansions engineered and delivered to construction teams in the field. One of those people on those construction teams, I'll go through and introduce our group here, and then we'll get into the presentation. RJ, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is RJ Harris. I'm a senior construction coordinator for Zachary. I've worked with Zachary and industrial construction for a little over 13 years, with the majority of my experience being in project controls / project planning. I joined the project, the POTBA project, about 4 years ago as the AWP manager, and my role shifted to senior construction coordinator shortly thereafter, where I lead the project controls department and have overall responsibility for advanced work packaging, scheduling, change management, cost, and all project reporting.
You're live from the construction trailer, the BRPs?
I am, yes. Blast resistant trailer. So.
Indeed. And Jeff?
Thank you very much, Alexis. I am Jeff Ryan. I'm the CEO and founder of Insight AWP. We're an AWP company that facilitates AWP for a whole series of projects around the world. We've been at this for 15 years now. This is our 15-year anniversary. Been involved in about 60 mega projects, and one of the really good projects that we've been involved in is this one. So looking forward to just talking about the sort of things that make that come together.
All righty. So the project itself. So first, LyondellBasell is one of the largest chemicals and plastics companies in the world. Operations all over the world, but largely focused on the U.S. Gulf Coast and Western Europe. We are building a new propylene oxide and tertiary butyl alcohol facility across 2 sites, but the largest portion of the work is in Channelview, Texas, so on the east side of Houston. The plant will produce propylene oxide and tertiary butyl alcohol, as well as an ethers facility. The primary technology for PO production is LyondellBasell's technology. So we were the inventor, of course, we're making use of technology. And of course, the Gulf Coast gives some significant feedstock advantages. So that gives you some history as to what the project is and why you would build it in Houston. In terms of the product itself, about 1 billion pounds of PO will be produced annually. PO goes into all kinds of products, foams, furniture, upholstery, such like this. And then 2.3 billion pounds of TBA and its derivatives, which is further processed into ethers and ends up being an additive for gasoline, for high octane or oxygenated cleaner burning fuels. So the project itself is about a $3 billion investment for LyondellBasell, and it is the largest organic capital expansion that Lyondell has ever undertaken. So it's a pretty substantial project from our point of view. The status of the project is it's currently well advanced into construction. Let's call it 3/4 of the way done, with expectation of being complete, let's say middle of next year timeframe. So here's the rendering of the facility. You can see the large number of units in the primary Channelview location. And pictures are nice, but it is sometimes difficult to get a sense of how big and complicated a plant like this might be. So just some numbers off the top of your head. 40,000 engineering drawings, 900 P&IDs, nearly 1,000 miles of cable, 200 miles of pipe to install. One of the numbers I find most amazing is 30,000 valves are going into the facility. So we're talking about a very substantial investment, not just in terms of money, but in terms of the effort required to put the facility together. It's basically a complicated bespoke item. We've never built a facility like this before. It is the world's largest POTBA facility. And so as such, there is an opportunity for us to deploy all kinds of techniques to ensure we can deliver this on time and on budget as expected. A couple of pictures of the job site showing you the progress. These are a little older now, but give you a sense of the scale of what we're doing. It's quite substantial. RJ and the gang are doing a lot of work out there. In terms of craft, we're at about 4,000-ish people on the job site, depending on the day, working from in a variety of work phases. So, why did LyondellBasell choose AWP? The project was very large and very complicated, and we were looking for ways to manage risk. We thought this was an appropriate way to go ahead and manage the risk associated with building such a large and complicated facility. It was the first use, it is the first use of AWP for LyondellBasell. So we worked with our engineering partner and used the Hexagon suite of tools to develop we'll say engineering and ultimately produce the EP results and the engineering work packages. We assembled an execution team who had AWP expertise, both from the contractor and external consultancies. And of course, we leveraged offshore centers, as most projects do nowadays, in order to deliver the engineering work. So several complicated moving parts, but the idea was to ensure we could support the work phase as best as possible and be successful at the work front. So as we finished engineering, began engineering, we engaged with our contractor, Zachary, to help them be part of our development of the packages, what the packages would look like, what the estimates and work look like, and help build out the actual work phases long before there was completed engineering work. From there, I'll let Jeff and Robert take over, or RJ take over.
Hey, thanks, Alexis. That's a very good, simple description of how we got started. Just thinking about today's presentation, and there's an old expression that you hear every once in a while, that it takes a whole village to raise a child. We know the theme of today's presentation is it takes a whole project to make AWP work, and certainly that's what we have going on POTBA. And as described by yourself, basically the owner that is encouraged to get better results, an experienced contractor that's done this before, that understands what their needs are, and of course, a bunch of other players in that same arena that helped us make this happen. So here's a quick review of sort of our role in the band. Initially, LyondellBasell came to us and said, "Hey, we want to do this." Exactly what you just said, Alex. We need to do this. We need to be successful. We need to make our contractors successful. How do we do that? So we got involved in the project in 2017. Started by doing a review of the project, and then basically making a roadmap for, okay, if we're going to be successful, these are all the parts. These are all the things that we're going to have to make happen. So we worked on developing with the teams the procedures and processes for LyondellBasell. We did some enormous part of the construction workshops where they would last a week or two, and really got into the weeds of building that roadmap that you just looked at. The expansion of that, of course, is the project schedule. I think RJ is going to talk about how we took a run at it and we got it pretty close, but when fully expecting that when Zachary came aboard, they would tweak it and make it actually workable. But we took that first run at it and try to build that based on AWP. Then, of course, we worked with engineering and procurement to see if we could align the schedule and the deliverables from those guys so that when Zachary came aboard, that they would have some sort of a sequence of engineering and procurement that would support the schedule. We initiated a CII case study, which I think we will see come out after the project, which will be really interesting. We've had them come to the project twice and basically just take a snapshot of what the project was doing. So that will be, they got facts and figures that will talk all about the success of AWP or the challenges that we had. We also got into the business of the data warehouse, so we centralized data and populated smart construction with that. Essentially, the roadmap of helping engineering and procurement come together was building that model that was, hey, the whole project is going to need this data. We're going to have to centralize it. We're going to have to standardize it. We're going to have to populate all the software. So we're still doing that today, and that's what we initiated 4 years ago now. So of course, We now in today's environment, we're helping the contractor understand, you know, or if you like, mine that data for their own use, and we're using smart construction for that. And a couple of tool time studies, so we've got a snapshot of the impact of that in the field. And of course, that data warehouse or that central environment also allowed us to use tools like Power BI to facilitate decision making. That we have a single source of truth from the project, which is that data warehouse. So pulling the reports from that with Power BI really do help facilitate the project. One of the places we're going to see that really come to fruition is in the process or the transition of construction into turnover. I know that already that's proving very powerful in understanding what's done and what's not done, and of course what needs to get done and in what sequence. And as simple as those questions are, they're very, very difficult to answer. So anyway, that's our role in the band. So with that, maybe we'll let RJ tell us about how you made use of that stuff.
All right, thank you guys. Yeah, so I'll dive into the Zachary piece of the AWP program. So Zachary, we mobilized to the engineering offices when engineering was about 30% complete in January of 2019. And then we mobilized to the field shortly thereafter in the summer, late summer, when engineering was about 50% complete to start the piling program, and then overall just general site work. And then after that, then progressed into underground, et cetera. Right, so as Jeff and Alexis talked about, an existing AWP program was in place. The construction work areas were defined. A path of construction was defined. There was a schedule, as Jeff talked about a little bit ago, that overall, I mean, it aligned with what we were thinking as far as execution. But I'll talk about that here in a little bit. Work package definition, there was EWPs and CWPs in place, and then material priorities and deliveries were also established to align with the existing program. Our scope of work on the project was pre-mobilization construction support. So when we first mobilized in January 2019, we went through a series of, kind of gap analysis on the AWP existing program to the program that we have, our corporate program. And then some other things that we did were constructability reviews, design reviews, et cetera, there in the beginning of the project. We have construction, direct and subcontract scope, so all construction on the facility, partial procurement, basic commodities, material receiving and handling, and then construction turnover.
So note that even though Zachary was not our engineering contractor, we as the owner thought it was prudent to bring them in early to the engineering company's office to get their buy-in and understanding of what we're trying to do to hopefully facilitate the AWP program going successfully in the field. And yes, we did mobilize prior to completion, but that completion, of course, allowed us to, percentage completion, had the underground and piling programs already completed. So Zachary could get to the field and get to work to try and maintain schedule.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was time very well spent to be able to kind of build those relationships with the engineering side of it, and also building it with the Lyondell project management team so that we could align on really deliverables that our goals. Right. All right, so just an overall, just an overview of the program, where we kind of started. So like we were talking about, there was a path of construction in place. What we did is we first dove into the path of construction and we optimized it to support, really our construction philosophies, different constructability type things, and then ultimately to feed into construction turnover. Some key things that we did, like I talked about on the previous slide, was we had constructability reviews over every craft. We have a detailed list of things that make construction easier, or that we've taken, lessons learned from previous projects, previous AWP projects that we worked with engineering on to kind of talk through those details. We looked at the design maturity, overall EWP contents, the table of contents associated with each EWP per craft, to see kind of how that will feed into construction. Material deliveries and priorities. I mean, ultimately, we needed to make sure that we supported the key equipment deliveries on site, along with accommodating the construction priorities that we were looking to work through. And then again, system turnover. I think system turnover is going to be a common theme throughout the presentation that I'll be talking to. The next thing we jumped into was a project schedule. So the schedule is the backbone overall of our process, of our overall AWP program. Right? It's logic driven from engineering to procurement to construction to commissioning. All of our IWPs are activities within the schedule that are logically tied, that feed ultimately the predecessors from engineering to procurement to the successors to startup, or to turnover to startup, right? So our schedule, I mean, ultimately throughout the life cycle of the project, you'll be able to see those, you'll be able to see float paths, et cetera, through these IWPs. So however we are performing, we'll be able to see the ultimate impacts towards the end of the project. And then we implemented AWP on all of our crafts, from site work to concrete, steel, mechanical, pipe, electrical, instrumentation, and paint. And then we also had we also have a small scope of insulation that we're self-performing. And then we also implemented on our prime subcontracts for piles, tanks, insulation, fireproofing, and then also insulation. We have a larger scope that we are working with the subcontractor on.
This is really interesting that not only did we work with Zachary, but Zachary, as they had some field subcontracts to implement, chose to ensure that their subcrafts are working on an AWP basis as well.
Yeah, that's important because you know, that's sometimes where it comes off the rails. So that was part of the experience that Zachary brought to the table there, I think.
Absolutely. Diving into more of the implementation of the program, you know, overall our program is leadership driven. We have a core project management team that we meet regularly on the overall health of the program. We're in all of the meetings. We talk through constraints, we talk through compliance, we talk through just about everything. We have meetings throughout the week that we're continuous touch points that we're working with the field and with all of the key stakeholders that are working within the IWPs. Have a large focused planning team. You know, there's have a large group that maintains the overall AWP program on the project of AWP managers down to planners. The planners, our general ratio of planner to superintendent is 1-to-1, so that we can make sure that we accommodate everything that's needed on developing IWPs, sequencing IWPs, removing constraints, et cetera. Material takeoffs, that's another key part of the program, is as when we go through and we develop MTOs, we ensure that we tag all of the key attributes to each one of those commodities, whether it be an IWP, system tagging, an area, whatever it is. We make sure that we go through and we tag all those things so we can track that stuff throughout the project. Our installation work packages, there's a lot of talk today in different forums around IWPs. And what we've done is aligns a lot with the different things, the different lessons learned that I think a lot of people have seen. We have around 10,000 IWPs on the project. IWPs change in size. It isn't the traditional 1,000 to 2,000 hours. It changes. An IWP in site work or concrete, it's going to be not totally different, but it's going to be a bigger package versus your traditional steel and pipe packages versus an electrical package. It's going to have 100 to 200 hours. Right. And so really the goal of what our IWPs are is it's a scope of work that a foreman could pick up and start and finish within the allotted time for that package. Right. And so to ensure that we can complete that work. Right. When we say that we're done with an IWP, we're done with an IWP. Right.
Done.
Material. Yeah, done. There you go. Material management. We go through and we tag the bill of material for all of our IWPs so that we can allocate specific material to the IWP, along with ensuring that material that's being delivered, say pipe spools or steel pieces, et cetera, support when we want to execute those IWPs. Document revision tracking, all of our IWPs after they're built are rev checked continuously in case something comes out, and to ensure that we execute the latest and greatest revision of what that is when the IWP actually hits the field.
And let's not diminish that. There's about 40,000 engineering drawings produced for this project, which means there's a lot of documentation. It's really a challenge to keep it straight. And that's really part of how AWP can be successful, because it can very quickly get messed up if we're not keeping track of that.
Absolutely. Change management, you know, things change, right? And so what we've done is we've incorporated that into our program to where either we add it to an existing IWP or we create IWPs for those changes on the fly kind of thing. And then system turnover. Like I said, our schedule's built that it feeds into system turnover. It goes from bulk construction and then also feeds into system turnover. So it helps to ensure that we're going down the right path, right? We can see what it's pushing and see what's happening to ensure that we meet ultimate the goal of when we want to achieve the project or want to complete the project.
And important to mention there, RJ, that I know that you are building installation work packages for hydro tests. So
Correct.
are you using packaging, and I imagine you'll have them for turnover as well. So that's sort of integrated with that process.
All right, I'm going to spend a little time on this slide here because I feel like, or we feel like, you know, talking through this, it's really, you know, an IWP, there's quite a few gates. It's quite a journey that an IWP goes through from actual creation to execution, right? And so on the project, what we did was we created all of our IWPs 120 plus days prior to construction, right? What that entailed was they were electronically built. Electronically built meant that MTOs were complete, bill of materials were established, and then ultimately the drawings were tagged and cover sheets, et cetera, but it was all electronic at that point. And what that really started was starting to remove hard constraints associated with the package. There to the right of the screen is what we categorize as hard constraints for packages, and then soft constraints. Hard constraints are really things that, you know, they're kind of outside. I guess the best way to categorize them is they're kind of outside of our control in construction, right? They're upstream type things, whether it be design, whether it be material, the things that will need other people's help to support executing that. Soft constraints are more things, more like things that are in our control, as far as you need scaffold, you need a crane, or subcontract coordination, et cetera, right? And so that'll be useful as I go through this timeline. So at T minus 90 days, so 90 days prior to execution, we start we start working, you know, to remove constraints. We start looking at different things, start identifying what hard constraints could potentially keep us from executing this package, right? And it's just kind of on our radar. We start working through the details on what that is. The other thing that we do is we assign check sheets to each one of the IWPs. We have critical checkpoints in the execution of work that we ensure that we sign those check sheets so that when we get to the execution, they're already there. They can already sign those things off, and we can complete the package. At T minus 45 days, that's where we kind of go back and look at those hard constraints that are on those packages. And if there's things that are still there at 45 days, that's where we elevate them, right? We elevate them to the project management team, we elevate them to engineering, we elevate them to the owner's project management team, so that we can expedite them and remove those constraints from the packages. Here in the next, as you go from T28 to actual execution, those are weeks 1 through 4. So when a package doesn't come into week 4 unless all constraints are removed on those packages. The only way that a package with a constraint can be moved into those 4 weeks is if it has project management buy-in, right? And so we have to get signatures, we have documentation associated with that to ensure that we've checked the box on everything. You know, like say if it was material, the material is going to be there in week 3 so that it can continuously go through the process and it'll meet the construction, the promise date that we've locked in. As it goes into the 4 weeks, we lock in those packages. So they're locked in, and then they start going through the process, right? As you go through T minus 21, you issue pick tickets for the material, you print the IWP and actually give it to the general foreman. And then they walk it down in week 2. They walk it down with quality and safety. So they walk it down with quality to ensure that those check sheets that we assigned early on in the process, that those are the right check sheets that need to be associated with that work. And then we also walk it down with safety. And so the purpose of walking it down with the safety facilitator is to make sure the work is safe to execute, right? And we walk through different things that could ultimately be a hazard within the work front, and so that you can pre-plan on what that is, and just kind of define different things that you need to look out for, or that your crew needs to look out for. We submit our scaffold request. We start to coordinate it. You start coordinating cranes within the whole 4 weeks, but the week 2 is really where you lock in what that is. And then material is bagged and tagged and loaded to trailers. Week 1 to week 2 is really when the material is delivered to location. The foreman goes through the material, aligns it with the bill of material that's assigned to the IWP, and then ultimately, at that point in time, when all of that's done, the package is ready to go, right? And then you hit week 0, and then you execute the package. At that point in time, the package, you're not done yet, right? And so once you once you finalize the work, you complete it, you progress all of the work out, then you do another walk with quality at the end of it. You walk through it, you sign all the quality check sheets associated with the package, and then you walk through it again with safety and you talk through kind of lessons learned associated with that package. You get all the signatures that are needed from the superintendent, general foreman, quality inspector, and the safety facilitator. And then you take it back to document management to scan back into the document management system. And then at that point in time, then it's sitting there waiting for your turnover package that you're going to get to later on in the project. So I know that's kind of a lot to go through, but I think that, us talking through this prior to the conference, this is an important piece of the overall process that we really need to work through.
Yeah, a
I do
couple of
like the
key points here.
emphasis. Oh, please go ahead, Jeff.
No, go ahead, Alexis. Sorry.
The emphasis on safety is really important here. I think we spend a lot of time talking about how we can make IWP's installation more efficient, which is great, and that is ultimately the goal. But at LyondellBasell's, certainly, we share a culture with Zachary of essentially there's no reason to have anybody get hurt. We can manage it such that no one does. And so that focus on safety is really important. It's not meant to be an additional constraint. It really is, frankly, the core of what we're doing. And so I think that's an important point that RJ brings up, is that the safety part of it, or safety expectations, are built right into the package.
Yep. And the point I was just going to make there is that the expanded effort you're putting into safety and quality, or specifically quality, really pays off in turnover, because there's not a whole bunch of loose ends. And following up or having that QC inspection at the end of the packages really does make sure that it's done. And we're going to see the positive result for that when we start turning over systems.
All right, the next part of this is tracking, right? So I talked through the overall implementation, the overall life cycle really of an IWP, and then this is reporting that we have within Zachary that we share with Lyondell and Insight to kind of walk through, really the health of the IWP readiness side of it, and then I'll get into some more stuff here in a little bit. But this is really what defines overall kind of how our IWPs are planned, right? And so some traditional questions that are asked are, does our planned work support the overall project plan? Do we have enough constraint-free work? Does our planned staffing support our planned work? And what are the constraints in week 0 to 12, right? And so what this tool is it shows in the beginning of the project and partially through the project, you baseline a project, you rebaseline a project, and within that, it defines the number of hours that you need to achieve throughout the project to ultimately get to the end. Well, what this tool does is it shows what our plan is, our planned IWPs on an hour basis against what that plan is, right? And so that we can continuously monitor to see, are we planning enough work to support the plan for the project? If we're not planning enough, then we need to work with our team and pull in more work to support it. And then another layer that this also adds to it is the constraint-free hours against the hours that we're planning, right? And so it shows constraints on every one of the IWPs that are planned within this next 12 weeks so that we can dive into the details on each one, whether it be a pipe spool that's in week 11 that we need to monitor and make sure that it's going to be here before we hit week 4, or we don't have enough bolts, or design, or we have an issue with design that we need to go back and work with engineering and get that fixed before we get to week 4. And if we can't remove the constraint, then ultimately we move it back out, right? So that it doesn't go into the 4-week locked-in period like I talked about earlier. And the other thing that this thing does is it really, it shows what trends are we seeing, right? If there's constraints that we continuously see that come within the 12-week period, it's things that we can work with the owner on. We can work with suppliers, et cetera, to help expedite those types of things to where ultimately we can achieve the plan that we're set out to achieve.
So you'll hear me say this a lot from this point forward in the presentation. Why does this really matter to LyondellBasell as the owner? And the real answer is transparency. It goes some of the way to answering some of the questions as an owner you always have, but aren't really sure you can get good answers on. Do we have enough staffing? Do we have too much staffing? Is the project moving forward as we expect? And by looking at each IWP and tracking it in this way, it becomes much more clear about what is actually happening and what the actual plan is going forward. And so the ability to understand what the plan is, where the constraints exist, and if we have the staffing against it, as well as RJ suggests, do we have enough constraint-free work to support the actual overall schedule, becomes a really good tool as an owner to understand what is actually happening compared to some of the traditional progress methods where it's a bit of a guess on physical progress. So it actually does give you a little bit more insight as to what's going on the job site.
Yes, it's nice for the project management to know what's going on, but it's even nicer to know that Zachary know exactly what's going on.
Right. Good point. Exactly.
Absolutely. All right, moving a little further, after we execute a package, this is where kind of, there's still a lot of emphasis on this portion of it, right? And so even though you're finished with packages, there's still a lot of things that you can learn about, what happened through that execution of that IWP. Some of the other questions that are asked, are we achieving what we planned? What is holding us up from starting or finishing IWPs on time? And are there trends we can dive into? So part of our process is, after we execute a package, we sit down and we walk through every one of the IWPs that we missed, whether it be start or finish, and we assign one of these root causes, the root causes here to the right, to each one of those packages, along with an explanation on what happened, right? Some of the, and so back to the root causes, it could be either design, drawing holds, engineering rework, which that's categorized as RFIs, field queries, owner imposed. This could be something where the owner had some type of contract or subcontract that impeded with the execution of the IWP, or it could be something owner furnished equipment, right? Something like that could have impacted the IWP. Weather, which in the Gulf Coast area is a big one. The past 2 years, I think we've had record-breaking rain amounts or amounts of rain within these past couple of years. Third party, that's more of subcontracts that impact IWPs, material quality, planning. Maybe we had some kind of an impact associated with we didn't promise it on time or something along those lines. Execution, this is one that if we just failed to do it in the time that we committed to do it, we need to call it out, right? Maybe it's something where there's a trend associated with that you're going to identify later on. And then revise construction priority. Sometimes you have to pick up and you have to move over to something else, especially when you get to CTOs. Things start getting a little more focused on different scopes of work, right, that you need to achieve. So ultimately, we go through and we spend a lot of time on this. This is where the project management team really comes into play because we review this internally as a project, and then we also review it corporately so that we can work through those details, and we also review it with the owner as well. So Alexis and his team, they can see, what's happening, right? We could talk through the trends, we could talk through problems that are happening on the project, and it'll help us to course correct as we're moving through executing IWPs.
Yeah, this is a powerful way powerful tracker. It essentially becomes a construction management work list, because these are all the things that we could impact that would help IWPs get finished.
Yep. And with 10,000 packages on the project, you start to get some very nice trends to understand what's really happening, including things you would not necessarily have expected as the owner, perhaps places where we can do better. But it really does help drive that concept, or at least drive the understanding of what productivity is. I think all of us who attend these types of forums are constantly looking at productivity numbers, whether they be mythical or somehow expected. But what does that really mean? This type of tool allows us to actually truly track productivity. We were supposed to have gotten a package in this amount of time. We did or did not. What does that mean? What is that useful? And what are the trends? So it really does help not only see as a lesson learned, but frankly allows us to future predict what's going to happen on the rest of the job. Are there problems that are emerging? Should we be accounting for those problems? What does that mean for the schedule? So you're not quite as blinded with the typical problem where you get to 2/3 to the end of the project and all of a sudden all the problems show up. No, they were there the whole time. You just couldn't see them. With this kind of tracking, you get that opportunity to hopefully see what's happening and at least know what's going to happen later in the job, even better, perhaps correct for it.
Yeah, it really does quantify the magnitude of problems as well, doesn't it? Yep.
All right, like I talked about earlier, system turnover is something that is, it's a big part of the project, right? And that's where we're at right now. We're at around 80% complete on the project. So this is definitely the current space that we're sitting in on the project. The program was built with turnover in mind from day one. Like I said earlier, we went from bulk construction and then that fed into system turnover so that it was logically tied so that we could see the different impacts as we're going through the day-to-day execution. Work is complete when an IWP is complete to minimize project unknowns associated with traditional punch list items. So like we talked about earlier, I think Jeff, you said the term associated with it is we're done with the work, right? So we've started the work, completed the work, and then we've signed off on all of the quality documentation associated with that to ensure that the work is completed. Because ultimately you don't want to get to the end of this. You're trying to turn over packages and you have a long list of punch list items like traditional projects had, right? And so this is really a assurance for us as a constructor and for the owner to ensure when we get to the end of this that we can do kind of a seamless transition. The other part, like I talked about earlier, all of our commodities, we can track them through the whole process, right? And so as we do MTOs, we track all these, or we assign all these key attributes by craft, area, system, so that we can track all those things. Even when we're executing IWPs, we can still track all the widgets that feed into CTOs, right? Whether it be pipe spools, whether it be welds, bolt-ups, valves, cable, whatever it is, we track all of those things so that we can ultimately feed that into CTOs and know where we are at all times.
So what's really interesting is the work packages themselves are not only tracked and monitored by area, but by CTO as well. So what this means is you can start to look at timing for turnover on an IWP basis, and of course prioritize as necessary as you switch from doing bulk construction into systems-based construction. That's what the skyline is showing. That really is very helpful, again, as an owner, to understand what is actually going on the job. So when I worry about, is my system going to be ready for such and such a date? And the answer is, here's what's left to do. There truly is an understanding of what work is left to be done, not only in that area, but for that system, which may span multiple areas. So it's worthwhile to have those IWPs tracked in a couple different ways that can be referenced. And of course, that idea of having the punch list be minimized because an IWP means we're finished is really valuable. It just, on traditional jobs, you tend to have construction end, but of a punch list that's a mile long. So with this type of thinking, you're hopefully minimizing that. There's still punch list opportunities, but we're minimizing it by actually driving IWP completion as an expectation.
And that creates a bit of a completion culture in on the project as well.
Right,
and
we're in that phase now
where
we're definitely focused on why is an IWP not finished. In fact, we're putting more people literally, as I use the term, tiger teams, to identify why can't I complete IWP X or Y, and getting in there, moving those hard constraints, and hopefully driving them to completion.
Yeah, and I definitely, kind of to revisit it a little bit, I definitely don't want to give the wrong message that there's not going to be any punch list. You're still going to have punch lists on a project, but it minimizes, right? It's ultimately, what you got when you're completing IWPs, right?
Yeah. And just knowing what's left is a huge value. Yeah. Just as you said, Alexis, where just tell us where the finish line is.
Right. It's about that transparency.
It's 400 hours away. It's 400 hours away.
And it helps to eliminate that problem where you sit at 99.2% completion for 2 months.
Yes.
All right, and in closing, just going through the benefits of AWP that we've kind of identified through other projects that we've implemented AWP on, and then along with this project as well. Predictable execution. We've talked about it in multiple forms within this presentation, but design, material, installation, and turnover. Right, there's a lot of gates in the overall process that you can identify different things that are going to impact the project. And there's also things that really you can course correct. You identify them early enough that you can course correct and still follow through with the commitment that you made for the program. Work scopes are complete. I know we talked about this quite a bit here in the previous slide and through the presentation. And then transparency to the end customer compared to standard progress tracking methods, right? And so traditional is just progress based off of hours, right? And so you go through the project and you can dive in by maybe area, our overall project or area craft overall project. But what this gives you is a different kind of metrics that helps the owner, helps us as a constructor to really have that, really dive into the details of what's impacting the work, right? So you can go through and the different things like we talked about, just to recap those things, are constraint management. What are the things associated with that? Are we planning enough work to actually support what the baseline plan said? Are we planning enough work to support the amount of people that we have on the project? And then ultimately in execution, are we achieving what we said we're going to do, right? Whether it starts or finishes. And then are we holding ourselves accountable, right, to these different standards that we've set in place? And then ultimately, world-class execution. When you maintain these different gates within the process on material design, actual execution, it lines up for success while you're executing these different crafts, all right? Lessons learned. So AWP is a rigid philosophy, ultimately. I think there's some leniency in some of it. You have to adapt as you move through the process. But really, ultimately, you need to remember to work the plan, right? You put a lot of time, you put a lot of effort into developing the plan, into removing constraints associated with the plan that you've developed. And it's easy for people to get ideas, right? Get ideas of, oh man, I should move over to this area. There's nobody over there, so let's move some people over there, right? And so it's easy to get those ideas, it's easy to get those thoughts, come all the time, but ultimately you put a lot of time and effort into the plan that you're executing. So you need to stay on course, right? Allows focus on unexpected challenges. This is the same thing we talked about really in the benefits. Whether it be, say, pipe fabrication, maybe you're going to have an issue with those types of things, or delivery of steel. You're fabricating steel overseas, and possibly there's an issue with shipping steel here to the United States, right? It allows focus on those types of things because you've identified them early in the process of when you actually want to execute those types of things, and you're able to course correct on what that is. Design change is difficult, but can be managed. We talked about this multiple times as far as 40,000 ISOs. I think that's what you said, Alexis, something like that, and there's a lot of room within the amount of design, within the amount of linear footage of pipe on a project. You're going to have change, right? And you're going to have to manage those types of things. It can be managed, it can be caught early enough, and it can be pushed through the process that ultimately you're able to execute. And then focus on solutions and maintain commitment. It's easy to get wrapped up in the different things that are going, I guess, wrong with the process, right? But ultimately, focus on the solutions, right? I think that ultimately, AWP program on a project, you have to adapt in some areas, right? And so adapting is finding solutions to help you to progress along, right? And I think that one good example of this, which was said earlier in a presentation, is IWP, the size of IWPs, right? You can't go with a rigid approach of 1,000 to 2,000 hours because it doesn't work, right? But if you're focused on solutions and solution driven and trying to identify what will be the best for the craft, the execution, the ultimate for the project, that's kind of where it comes into play.
Hey, one of the other benefits that I would like to just add to your list there is one of the things that I see, especially on our project, but on several other mature projects, is that we don't talk about steel or pipe or concrete or valves or electrical. We talk packages.
Yeah.
And it's like a common language. And that was actually pointed out to me by Zachary, superintendent. I was at a construction meeting. One of the foremen started talking about a piece of pipe. And he says, no, we don't talk about pieces of pipe. We talk about packages. Your package can be finished. Is there something you need to help you finish the package? Okay, that's how we talk. And you know what? That's a common language and a common understanding that everybody can understand. And then of course your focus is exactly what you just said. It's, can we build packages that close? Because it's all about closing the package. And yeah, that's something that the certainly the Zachary workforce picked up and ran with very well.
So from an owner's perspective, the question is it something we do again, does it pay off? And the answer is yes. The reason you take on this kind of program as an owner is you want to be able to contain risk. Risk doesn't necessarily mean the plant will be somehow 40% less money or get billed a year ahead of schedule. It means you understand where the challenges lay and you can manage against them. And that's what AWP brought us. by bringing the contractor in early, having them work with the engineer, we were able to identify those opportunities, and we're managing in the field today. In one of the breakout sessions today, I laughed because the comment was made that engineering does not follow the same path of construction that construction does. And that's absolutely true. And that's one of our probably biggest lessons learned, that the alignment between what engineering thinks done looks like and what construction thinks done looks like may not be the same thing. But at least you identify that opportunity early rather than in the middle of when you're constructing something. So that to me is the real benefit. Of course, the other benefit for the field is truly understanding what's happening. That transparency is invaluable. And I don't think we really thought about it as an owner when we first deployed the program, that would be such a benefit, but it really is. Instead of having vague notions of what progress is, or again, where you take a look at progress as maybe getting the easy stuff down early, and then you get slow progress in the middle of the job, or again, lingering progress at the end, it really is much more transparent to understand what is happening. Because you're focusing on packages and done being done, then it's really much easier to understand where the job sits and what's keeping it from moving forward. Then ultimately, that transition to turnover, which is based on what amounts to packages sorted by system, is very valuable because you know where you sit and what is keeping you from getting a system done, and then you can go focus on getting that taken care of. So once again, it's that being able to see the big picture, seeing what's happening, is really what's beneficial from a customer's point of view. All right. So I think, Lloyd, we're at the questions mark.
Yeah, I think we're in the Q&A session. Steve, can you put up the Slido slide? And I've got to say, every year, the question we get asked is, can you tell us the truth? Can you tell us what's really going on in the field? So we really appreciate this type of presentation. So again, if you could put your questions up, but also vote for the questions so we can see which ones people are most interested in hearing the answers to. And let's get started with the first question. Do you require your subcontractors to write and execute by IWP? And when did you bring them into the process of developing IWPs? And I'm guessing that would be for all three of you.
Yeah, I can take this one. So yes and no, right? And so so some of the main subcontractors are the ones that we require to be written into their contract that they needed to, or they had to align with AWP, and with that is develop IWPs. There were some of the smaller ones that it just didn't make sense. They didn't have the resources associated with their work, but ultimately we tracked their work in the schedule to ensure that it fed into our overall process. We brought our subcontractors in. It ranged, right? So some of them we brought in 2 to 3 months early, maybe 4 months early, and then some of them it was a month earlier, right? So the reason why I say a month early is because like the installation portion of it right now, that's kind of where we're working through it. But ultimately, we help them through the process. We help them to align with our overall requirements for the project, and so that's kind of the overall for each subcontractor.
Great. Next question is, can you speak to the material management system that was used and how it integrated with the IWPs?
So I guess I'll start. We obviously worked with our engineering company who was acting as EP for us. So they were responsible for getting materials to the work site. And let's be honest, the fact that we had a bit of a slowdown with the global pandemic gave us an opportunity to have a lot of things arrive and be available to be transferred to Zachary. Once they arrived at the Layton area, Zachary's team took over.
Yeah, we had a tracking system of the overall material on site, and we tracked those to each. And so what we did is we tagged each one of those components to each one of the IWPs. And so there wasn't a specific system that we used. We worked with the client, with I think it's Smart Plant Foundation on that part of it. But then we had another tracking system that we ultimately tagged everything to.
Right. So if it's a question of which actual system, we were using the foundation suite on our side to understand basically receipt of materials into channel view. And then, like I said, Zachary managed independently their own system to then manage the laydown yard of warehouses and pick for the packages.
Great. Another question you got is, have you built a dedicated AWP task force within your project team?
So we do have I do have a dedicated team for AWP. So like I said earlier, I'm over all project controls, so I have different managers over each of the things that I'm over. But I do have a dedicated team. I have actually 3 AWP managers because the site's broken up into different areas. We have IBO, OBO, and then CBO South. Then within those, we have planners that align with each one of the superintendents.
But that's
Great.
that's an important statement too.
Any other
That's one of the questions we get quite often is what is the ratio of planners to workforce? So, you know, that's a good takeaway for everybody on the call is you guys have found a recipe that works, and that is 1-to-1.
I think it's critical really to have a planner for each superintendent. You know, these IWPs, they take a lot of time, they take a lot of effort. There's a lot that goes into the planning, there's a lot that goes into the constraint management. And then also when you bring change management and other things into it, it just works to where the two of them can work together and work through the details.
And as an owner, we recognize that value. So obviously, we're obviously paying for that effort. But even when we had a bit of a slowdown related to the pandemic, we kept that particular part of the organization going to continue building out the IWPs. We thought that was valuable. And so even though we may not have been getting construction progress, we continue to say, build the packages, get those packages put together so we can be really efficient. We're able to get the job site back fully open again. And that has absolutely paid off.
The other half of that answer is that LyondellBasell also have an AWP team.
Sorry, yes, yeah, that's a good point. Good point. Yes, we do.
Yeah.
So the next question you've got is around KPIs, and what type of AWP KPIs did you measure, and how did they compare plan to actual?
I'll let you take that one, RJ. Goes back to your slide about the package programs or success.
Yeah, so what we usually track is, so like I said earlier, we lock in packages in the 4-week period, right? Once they hit the 4 weeks, then we lock in a date associated with what that package is. What we track after that is how many of those actual IWPs within that period. So if you had 100 that you planned within that period, how many of those actual IWPs did you achieve within that period? How many of those IWPs did you say start or finish earlier than that period? And how many started and finished after that period, right? And so really what that gives you is an ultimate compliance associated with what your plan is, to where you can see, you know, are you starting a lot of things early? Are you finishing a lot of things early? Or are you missing, or the biggest one is, are you missing a lot of things, right? And so really the plan is what you locked in within those 4 weeks. And then the actual is what I just talked about, whether it was before, in the period, or after.
Because the hard constraints prohibited packages from moving forward, even to getting to that point, you hopefully aren't getting packages that are being held up by the obvious thing. There's some other external force that keeps you moving forward. So that's also a KPI, is how many of these packages are being actually moved through the gates as planned.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Sorry, AJ. That's the other thing that tracking at this level allows you to do. It allows you to zero in and answer that question. You know, how come it didn't work? You know, is there something we should have done that would have made it work? Yeah.
Great. And sorry, they're just moving around a little bit. How did you assign E&I IWPs to system turnover?
So ultimately, cable pulls and terminations, you know, along with cable tray, et cetera, all upstream predecessor activities to cable and terminations. You can do cable tray, you can do lighting, you can do all those specific things by an area-based approach. But then when you get to cable and terminations, those are more of a system-based type of thing, right? And so it was a area-based and a system-based, right? So within a specific area, we had multiple systems that fed into those areas. So we had multiple IWPs within those areas. So it's not an easy answer for it ultimately. It was kind of some trial and error as we worked through the process, but that was really how we did it.
Okay, and I believe we've already answered a question on KPIs. So Steve, could you hide that one and we'll go to the next question. Can you describe IWP for last mile delivery to work phase? Is
So that
that
was
a Zachary?
Yeah. So in the I guess the pre-execution timeline, the last portion of it was I had it listed out in there as far as I don't know if this is asking is it actually getting it to the field? I would say.
I'm assuming they're talking about getting it from the last 4 weeks to the job site, packaging it up, bagging and
Okay.
tagging, and actually getting it to the craft people.
Yeah, so that's where ultimately you do the walk downs. You give it to the general foreman, you do the walk downs, you bag and tag, you get the material, or you receive the material on location, you walk it down with quality, you walk it down with safety, and then you're ready to execute once you check all those boxes.
I know the project isn't finished yet, but how's it tracking for schedule and budget?
I was going to answer yes. It's going to end on schedule and within budget, but correct, it's not yet finished.
There you go.
At this point, we did do a budget revision for some unrelated issues, but at this point, we are tracking to be where we expect to be at this point. Our forecasts are showing positive. In fact, in some cases, it could be interpreted that we're a little bit ahead. I'm not going to be that optimistic, but we're in very good shape as it sits right now.
Okay, and the next question was for you, Alexis. What would you do differently next time around?
That's a really good question. I think the concept and notion that, I'll go back to engineering, that's my space, that engineering is inherently able to deliver EWPs to support IWPs. The engineering industry isn't quite at the point yet where AWP generation or the path of construction is part of its DNA. People still focus on working based on discipline. Mechanical engineers do their thing, civil engineers do their thing, and then you tend to start building engineering work packages at the back end of that rather than as part of the native work. It'll take some time for the tools and the industry, but really the culture of people in the EP space to really start to understand and internalize that. And I'm part of it too. I mean, I have large teams of engineering personnel who are overseeing that work and may not have been thinking about it quite in the most efficient way. So I don't think we were as efficient as turning the engineering into EWPs and ultimately to support RJ's building out IWPs as we could have been. So that I think is maturity, and frankly, conferences like this really help get people to understand how to do that a little bit better. So that's where I think the improvement for project number 2 really will come from.
Great.
Yep,
And we have about 2 minutes left, so I'd just like to get closing thoughts from all three of you. Alexis, I think you probably just gave us yours, but Jeff and Robert, can you share your closing thoughts?
RJ?
Yeah. So ultimately, the program that we implemented on the project here, it turned out very well. I mean, I think that we had some lessons learned, some things that we worked through, some things that we identified as we worked through the whole process. But all in all, it's going well. Ultimately, we're at the end of it. We're moving into hydro testing, CTOs, et cetera, and everything is feeding into kind of what we planned on and how we plan to execute it. So ultimately, I think everything has gone really well.
Great. And Jeff, your closing thoughts?
I think things have gone very well, but only because everybody took a really hard run at this and nobody expected it to be easy. So I think my advice would be don't expect it to be easy.
Absolutely.
And because but you know what, it is going well, but we've got dedicated stakeholders that work their way through issues and stuck to the core process and understand the true value is to facilitate work, and everything we do has to be somehow targeting that. So anyway, great combination of stakeholders, long train, but now we're starting to get to the really good end of this, where we're actually going to see really good results.
Well, thanks so much for the presentation. I think it was incredibly informative. You're going to be here tomorrow, so or at least we can get things to you if you aren't. So if you have any questions for the speakers that we didn't get to, please just send them to us, and we'll try and get them to the presenters. Tomorrow afternoon, we'll try